Sexual freedom is something that at one point in my life I didn't truly understand what it was, and I did not truly understand the capacity of potential that sexual freedom makes space for in our lives. It was also something that upon that understanding I did not feel I would ever have, and maybe I didn't feel quite worthy of. It felt like something others could have, and it wasn't attainable for me. I am not talking about the kind of sexual freedom that gives us permission to have as many partners as we may like, or to explore the act of sex in the wide varieties in which we can physically put ourselves. I'm talking about a sexual freedom that invites us to fully show up in the world as a sexual being, and invites us to express that from our own truth. So for myself, that meant returning tenderly to the childhood sexual trauma that I had experienced, and really taking the time to self-parent, to know that was not my fault, to know that I was not broken, to know that I was not tainted, to know that the shame, the anger, the unworthiness, the untouchable, the unlovable, the responsibility was not mine to be carrying anymore. These beliefs I had held around my sex, around my voice being able to say no, around feeling obligated. There was so much that was suppressing my ability to be a sexual being, and from a young age confusing what that meant, because the innocence of being a sexual being had been disturbed, that right had been taken. So it was really noticing for myself that I was not damaged, and that I could return to a sense of sexual innocence and sexual freedom by choice. We also may have our environment that creates beliefs that suppress our sexuality. A prime one is our sex education, where we are taught that A equals B and you may get an STD or a baby. We are not taught about pleasure. We are not taught about relationships. We are not taught about feeling safe in our bodies as a priority before we can feel safe in relationships in the world around us. Our sex education is very functional and very primitive. So on top of our sex education, we also have religion, our culture, our society, giving us messages all the time about what sex is and what to be sexy is. And it is all determined, all focused purely upon the act and how we look, which is not an invitation to feel safe in sex, to truly immerse ourselves into the pleasure of sex as the act, and neither does it invite us to expand into the knowing, the felt sense knowing of what it is to be a sexual being. So when we gift ourselves permission to look at and unpick and unravel all the beliefs that we may have been carrying as our own around what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what sex is, how sex feels, what sex function is, when we unpick and unravel all the bullshit, when we gently attend to our trauma and notice whether these are responsibilities that we have been carrying for someone else, whether these are wounds that we built habitual patterns around to keep us safe, but are now keeping us small. When we look at maybe what we may have heard or seen or experienced and absorbed that as truth, and have been living our lives from that truth. When we give ourselves this permission, the untruths dissolve, and there is a spaciousness, and within that spaciousness is the sexual freedom I am speaking of. The sexual freedom that invites you to express who you are as a sexual being in the world, without shame, without judgment, without limitation, and without limiting all that power, all that pleasure, all that creativity to the one source of the act of sex. Our potential as a sexual being is as far and as wide and as delicious and as powerful and as creative as the universe and beyond. And it is sexual freedom beyond the bullshit, beyond the untruths, beyond all these things that we have been carrying that are not our own, that takes us home to this. And at last we feel safe, and at last there is belonging in being a sexual being.